But in other news, a legendary department store is calling it quits. And they're blaming the Chancellor on the way out.
Yes, Beales, founded back in 1881, is closing its last branch with a cheeky dig at Rachel Reeves. The boss says soaring taxes have simply made the business unviable.
Well, joining us now is the CEO of the British Independent Retailers Association, Andrew Goodacre. Thank you very much indeed for coming into the studio.
Thank you for having me.
Just your thoughts on this. So Beales, very sad day, closing down the last store, 144 years old, this department store, and they're making a little political statement, aren't they?
And I don't blame them. You know, I think many retailers feel the same way Beales do, deeply disappointed in a Labour government that pre-election talked about reforming business rates, wholesale reform of business rates, talked about revitalising high streets, and yet all those businesses have seen is a triple whammy of cost increases, national insurance, national living wage and business rates. So I'm not surprised that Beales are required or feel it necessary to point that out to the people who made those decisions.
And this is a time when brick and mortar shops are facing increased competition from online.
Yep.
People are changing the way that they shop. And on top of that, rather than help, there seem to be punitive taxes after punitive taxes. It does seem strange given how the Labour Party was speaking before the general election, saying that we're not going to raise national insurance.
Sure.
Now the Chancellor says, well, she's stuck to her promise because she's putting this tax on business rather than on employees. Do you buy that?
No, I don't. I think there was a massive error of judgment in the way they prepared for that budget because they recognised the need to raise money, but they only left themselves with one option, and that was business. And retail are one of the biggest employers as a sector. So it's really going to hurt retailers of all sizes. And retail is often the first job for people. You know, we want to get young people back at work. There's a real problem in this country, young people not working. And retail in the past has been a way for them to learn good, important skills. And that's becoming increasingly difficult for them to achieve as well. So I think the policy will backfire in many different ways. Yes, it may generate extra income, but at what cost to the high street and what cost to young people looking for jobs?
Yeah, jobs especially. I wonder what you also make of this new Treasury Committee report. It's essentially warning that shops could be forced in the future to accept cash.
Yes.
Very interesting one. Also in light of the blackouts on the continent as well, where people, you know, if they didn't have cash, they couldn't buy anything.
Yeah, I was looking at this, and if in our membership, I can only think of one member who only takes card. And it's a small shop in Shoreham, haberdashery, knitting yarns, and that's her choice. Most of our members wouldn't want to lose a sale because they don't take cash. And we recognise most retailers, a high percentage of retailers recognise that some people, older people, disabled people, people wanting to budget their spend better, want to use cash. So we're all for encouraging people to be able to use cash. What we do need to see, however, is a cohesive approach. If you want businesses to accept cash, you need banking in order to allow them to manage that cash. You know, they have to go to banks to cash it, to change it, to bring change in. And what businesses are finding is that banks are closing their branches. You know, by tens and hundreds of branches closed over the last few years. And so that makes it harder for business to work with cash.
Yeah, so they've got all this cash lying around that they need to put in a bank because they can't get to a branch.
It's okay saying to a business, by all means, you know, take cash, but cohesively, you need to allow them to manage that cash, move it onto the bank safely and with less fees. So
the wider infrastructure is so important there.
Well, in a way, the banks are driving cash out of the system.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Andrew Goodacre, executive of the British Independent Retailers Association, thanks indeed for joining us and coming into the studio too.
We should say GBNews has reached out to the Treasury for a comment on this one.
And it all kicked off earlier at Prime Minister's questions as the leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch, accused Labour of cover-ups regarding grooming gangs.
And the Prime Minister, he said they'll invest more.
Chaos and cover-ups with Labour councils. When will he show leadership and do the right thing?
The right thing to do is to invest in our criminal justice system so we can bring people to justice. They've absolutely collapsed the criminal justice system. Their record was abysmal. They should hang their heads in shame.
Well, there you go. Another PMQ's dominated by the issue of grooming gangs. Here in the studio is our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Catherine, nice to see you. So, who came out on top? And did Keir Starmer have the answers that the public want to know?
Well, I don't think well, he would say he gave lots of answers. There were some very specific questions asked that were, of course, skirted. But I think there was widespread astonishment that Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the opposition, did not mention net zero, this huge row that's erupted the front pages of all these papers today over Tony Blair's comments. And she went instead on grooming gangs, a topic that Charlie Peters and GBNews have led on. Charlie Peters for many years, but given a huge boost, of course, by Elon Musk at the beginning of the year. Now, she used all of her questions on that, basically saying, was the government dragging its heels because lots of Labour councils are in the areas that a lot of these horrific crimes have taken place? The Prime Minister did not answer that. He kept on talking about his record in addressing this as Director of Public Prosecutions. And she said, look, we don't want to hear about that. We don't want to hear about what you did in the past. We want to hear about what you are doing now. And of course, the government, announced this rapid review that was going to take 3 months. We're still waiting for the results of that. We also heard there were going to be 5 local inquiries. Now, it seems at the moment that there's only Oldham that's actually been launched. So a lot of unanswered questions. But of course, as the Prime Minister made clear, the J report and the recommendations, the government are pushing through with those. The Tories didn't actually implement any of those, and they're very keen to say that Kemi Badenoch, this wasn't a subject that she talked about passionately or really at all when she was in government.
Well, of course, what the Conservatives say is that the ICSA report covered everything from the Church of England to Jimmy Savile. It wasn't specifically about the grooming gangs issue, and all of the recommendations, they didn't really bear relation to the specific issue of Pakistani grooming gangs that now seems to be top of the agenda. But I wonder, Oldham is the only local inquiry going ahead with this government funding at the moment. Oldham changed leadership. The council was once run by Labour. Then a couple of years ago, new composition of the council, they are now happy to investigate themselves. I wonder, if you have the same people leading the councils that you've had for a long, long time, is there going to be that same impetus to investigate really themselves?
I think that's a very pertinent question. And as you say, the J report was very wide-ranging. There's about 50 areas that Charlie Peters has uncovered. These horrific crimes were going on and in some cases still are continuing in. And yet, we haven't had the national public inquiry where people would be legally compelled to give evidence. That's the difference. If you can't make people give evidence, why would local councillors want to mark their own homework? Also, I am told exclusively that the reason that Kemi Badenoch did not go on net zero was she wanted to make a link to the local elections, and the Conservatives are very aware that very often these areas are in Labour-controlled local authorities.
Yeah, that's very interesting insight there, Catherine. Thank you very much indeed.
And of course, we should make clear that all parties are fighting those local elections. People go to the polls tomorrow.